Hi, we're really excited today. We don't always have a guest on the podcast, but we have Jen Bergren with us today, and she's going to be talking to us about answering the question, how do you create a documentation habit when time and resources are limited? So, Jen, before we answer that question, I'm hoping that maybe you can do a short introduction about who you are and how you got interested in documentation.
Sure. Thanks for having me on your show to answer this very important question. And my name is Jen Bergren. I've had many careers, but kind of a common thread throughout all of them is noticing most companies don't have documentation. It's very helpful, and I was usually creating it without knowing like what it officially was called. And so then eventually I created classes on how to do documentation because I saw that was a gap and not something that was being taught anywhere. That's could be very helpful in reducing stress and helping people and companies achieve their goals.
True. So, maybe do we start with like, why is this important?
Sure. So I think when you're thinking about your question about the part of the question about not having time for
Mm-hmm.
documentation, maybe reframing it to think, what is the cost of not having documentation? That would be like, why is it important? I think some of those costs are more people are going to be making more errors. And you, as this audience of ops people and problem solvers, are probably going to be spending more time correcting those errors, putting out fires that could have been prevented if someone had or used the documentation. Uh, and all that time you could have been spending doing more strategic work to move goals forward. Instead, you're spending time like fixing things that went wrong because you didn't have documentation or people didn't use it. Similarly, another one of those time costs is all the time someone spends redoing or re-researching things somebody else has already done. Maybe that person left the company, they didn't document it. Employee onboarding is a big thing that will have additional time and stress added to it on both sides if there's no documentation about how things work. Like the new people and the people already at the company are going to be spending more time in employee onboarding, answering questions. Similarly, the cost is the frustration of
Mm.
one person answering the same question 23 times since documentation doesn't exist or people don't know it exists. So I think it's probably more important to create documentation when you have limited resources so you're not wasting that precious time making errors, recreating the wheel each time that you do a process, or if team members aren't learning and sharing information from each other about their processes. But what do you both think?
Well, I want to ask one more question, Jen. So it
Okay.
feels sometimes like it's a huge task to start
Yeah.
documentation, especially if it's not been done before. It's even scarier when you're that new person noticing things that are just, I can't find it, that person's gone. How do I, go about figuring this out? And how do you make this process not seem so overwhelming? Is there a way to start documentation and build on it so that there's little just wins along the way so that, further along the line, hopefully at the end of the year, the documentation is complete? I mean, I guess what is the timeline you're thinking for getting good documentation in place? Should people be putting pressure under themselves to do it in a short period of time?
I think the timeline is going to vary so much. It's hard to put an end goal on that depending on the size of your company, how much you're documenting for. It is a continuous, never-ending project, which kind of sounds depressing, but it's an activity like networking. It's something that's always going to be happening. But I do have a couple tips to try to reduce that overwhelm because that's definitely a real thing I hear about a lot. I have myself sometimes. I think the first tip would be thinking about it as you don't have to do it all at once as like one big continuous, well, not continuous, one big project. You don't have to document all the processes in the company all at once, or even you don't even have to complete all of one document perfectly before it is useful. That would definitely be overwhelming. So thinking about it as it's not all or nothing. Maybe you just start documenting one part of a process that you or other people keep forgetting or having trouble with or struggling with. And maybe you just document that piece of the process first to help people. And then the rest of the document says like coming soon, we'll fill this in later. Just just aiming to be helpful and not perfect because processes are always changing. It's never going to be perfect. And I have a second point is thinking about you don't have to do it all yourself unless you're a one-person company, but I don't think we're talking about solopreneurs here. We're talking about maybe small teams. So you can spread out the work of documentation by clearly defining roles so people know how they should be involved in documentation. Usually it's a mystery, like, should I make a document? Should I use a document? Should I be approving documents? I want to make a change to the stuff. No one knows who's doing what. So clearly defining users and creators and editors and approvers and subject matter experts who might be reviewing the content. Not everyone's going to have every role. Getting out your fun racy chart, maybe. Go ahead.
I was going to ask, do you have a platform? I mean, I'm sure you could do this just in like a Google Sheet, but do you have a preferred way that you like to tell people how to do it?
I do not have a preferred way. I would say using tools you're already using so you don't have to teach people to use a new tool on top of a new habit, because that's like two hard things to do at the same time.
Yeah.
And I do have one more note, if that's okay.
Of course.
That's okay. Thinking about overwhelm, just thinking about you don't have to rely on memory to remember to do the documentation. The documentation is supposed to serve as your memory, but I suggest building a system to make it easier to know when to do and when to update documentation to remove that burden on your memory, making documentation more efficient. And I know you just asked about, I think, software methods. So I'm not talking about buying one new fancy piece of software. I know we all, or many of us, love to do software research. I like to say software research is usually procrastination of the documentation itself. What I mean by system, we can use our fun ops words of like orchestrating or architecting a system of continuous improvement involving project management, time management like calendar blocking, communication methods and cadences, and then storage of documents, of course. And then I had one more tip, one intertwined tip that you could do today that doesn't take that much time to set up is block some recurring time on your calendar quarterly for documentation improvements and maintenance, maybe a few hours, a few days, 1 week, a quarter, or add recurring tasks for quarterly documentation time into your project management tool. Or if you work in sprints, set up a sprint every quarter. Those are my not very quick tips for reducing your overwhelm, but I'd love to hear from both of you. What have you found helpful to reduce that overwhelm of documenting?
Yeah, I love what you said about it's not all or nothing, and that it needs to be aim it to be helpful, not perfect. One of the things as a consultant, as I do so much documentation, is that as I'm documenting things or as I'm building things, I'm often documenting. And often, if I get to a point that I don't know how to document something, it's actually an indication not of the documentation, it's more about the process. So sometimes that documentation, if you're struggling with it, it could be that maybe the process that you actually have is too complicated or whatnot. So, like the documentation itself is kind of a language about what you're doing, which can be really helpful to help you make something more simple, make something more streamlined. So I do like to do it as I go. My biggest, it's hard to sometimes get back to it. You know, sometimes I document and then it's like this nice little thing that lives on a shelf that I don't go back to.
I do think it's a good piece to have when you hand it off to your client or to have new onboards to refresh and look at it as a fresh set of eyes to have questions. I've also seen folks that they build documentation without the process included, where they're like, when you're in the computer or you're processing this request, you do this, this, this. And then, you know, what happens if something falls outside of that normal operating procedure? That's not documented. There's like an off conversation that people manage. So you should be documenting those pieces. You should document all the expectations of how to operate and work together. And I think there's probably different levels, right, Jen? Like there would be standard procedures for how to operate. There's also technical documentation, which Carey and I do a lot when we're building out things in our software. We're documenting how the program works, how to process it, why we built things the way we did for it to achieve the outcomes that people are expecting. But there is that people process piece that everyone needs to be aware of. One of the things we did at my last organization, we didn't name specific individuals because we knew they might not be there in a couple of weeks, couple months, couple of years. So it was always to the job title.
Yes.
I think it's better, and hopefully there's not a lot of crazy reorg happening, but usually, your head marketing officer or the, director of marketing are still there and they can be named. So those are, I guess, a few of my thoughts on this subject.
Those are great tips. Thank you both for sharing.
Yeah, I'd like to ask you one question too is, do you find that a lot of the documentation you do is truly in like a document, like Word document or Confluence, or do you do much in like a lucid chart or like a flow chart maker?
I think a flow chart is good to add to the written steps of the document because there's different audiences for the flow chart, such as some of the flow charts might be more technical, but some of them also might be more like an overview of the entire giant process that maybe just leadership wants to see the steps, but not how to do everything in all of the tools, for example. So I think those two things are good to combine. And then I had something about Danielle triggered my memory about something I don't see often in documentation, but is super helpful. And I include it in the template that I give people is having like a history or context section at the top for that information that is, helpful people information about why did we start this? What are the goals? What have we tried before that didn't work? Why are we doing it this way? Things that aren't like the clear step-by-step how to do this can also help reduce the number of questions that you get about this process and help people understand more.
Those are the best conversations when you start a new job and they're like, historically,
why do we do this?
Historically, this is how this functions. You're like, okay.
Yeah, I think this is great. I think what you've done is you've made it less intimidating, and I hope people don't feel like documentation is this like other thing that is like another thing to do. It's really something to incorporate into your daily processes, or maybe your weekly or monthly processes too. But I think this idea of not getting overwhelmed or intimidated by creating this big perfect, document that is set in stone and can't be changed is that you have this living, breathing document, and people should feel comfortable diving in and not being not having the barrier be some high expectation.
Yes,
Definitely think it's worth putting on that calendar reminder to check your documentation every quarter. I think that's an easy add. Everyone could do it today.
So do you have any wrap up words, or do you want to just leave it here? You've given us some great tips, but if you have like your elevator pitch of documentation as a sign off.
I do not have an elevator pitch of documentation. Any kind of documentation is probably helpful. Yes. I would say to reduce the overwhelm. As you were saying, doing it as you're in the flow of work is super helpful. If you get to a sticking point, add like that in progress coming soon. I'm still working on this part of note to that process and just keep going.
Excellent. Well, we appreciate you taking the time to meet with us today. We really enjoyed it. And I'll keep following you on LinkedIn. And you mentioned you also teach on Maven?
On Maven.com, yes.
And also MarketingOps.
MarketingOps.com, yes.
Got to give them a plug. So,
yes.
So if you're looking for some more instruction, a little bit more detailed, connect with Jen there or on LinkedIn. Thank you guys